Welcome to the Being Curious Show. I'm Brian Mariani, founder of No Shift Own.
And I'm Kelly Wagner, publisher of Edge Magazine. Our show is about curiously connecting teachers and seekers on a wide range of topics in a safe space. Few topics will be off limits, and we have some amazing guests to share with you.
Our intention is that our conversations will spark your own curiosity to create a life that lights you up and inspires you to be kind, thoughtful, open-minded to yourself and others.
So, Brian, what are you curious about today?
Well, here we go, Kelly. Another show.
Yeah.
Very excited. And we're taping this show during the summer, and I don't know about you, but in Boston, it is so humid. I went out at 6 a.m. to run, and I was sweating on the front porch.
Ooh.
What's it like there in Minneapolis?
You know what? It's kind of bipolar right now. It will be in like the 60s, and then we'll all of a sudden be in the 90s. And we're getting a lot of the Canadian forest fires that are coming in, so the air quality is kind of feeling it. So that's probably a really good way, right? This is the time of year to be in Minneapolis, like, right? Because this is just, the weather is great, everything's green. It's be with the lakes, be outside. Yeah, it's just, this is my favorite time of year, and I do have to say I love my air conditioning.
What are your kids up to this summer? Do you have to like drive them around a million places, or are they at camp, or what are they up to?
All of the above. So my son's girlfriend just got her driver's license. So they're kind of doing that. Like, you know how like when you get your driver's license and all of a sudden you have the keys and you have the possibilities to, if you want to go to a gas station and get some Cheetos, you can, or you can just go drive around for fun. So I think they're doing a lot of that. And then my daughter is in softball, very competitive softball. So she's rocking it out with that. And I'm loving it being a mom, but my husband's really cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs of the softball and everything around the softball. So it's rather interesting.
Very cool. Is that been like a lifetime thing for her? Or is it she just picked up on softball?
She picked up on it, and we told her you need to have a sport, like, right? Like, yeah. Please have a sport. You need to do something. And when she was in preschool, her the lady that ran the preschool place, it was with Goddard, and a beautiful facility. And Valere looked at me and she's like, I was playing catch with your daughter, and now she's just this little teeny thing. And she's like, she's got an arm and she's accurate. So you might want to get into softball or something like that. So that's where we started. I played volleyball all throughout, like, right. And so I really secretly wanted her to like really take to volleyball so I could be involved. But no, it's softball. And it's just crazy. And she's only in like 12U, and it's competitive. People have coaches, and they have batting coaches, and they have pitch. I mean, like, it's totally different than when I was younger. And I'm not trying to sound old, but yeah, kind of.
Does she have a position that she's kind of locked
First
in on?
First base. She's rocking in. Oh, wow. She's right. Yeah. So you want Brinley to come up to plate when the bases are loaded, because she's got an arm on her, and first base. The girl can stretch and catch and all that fun stuff. So yeah. That's
exciting. Very cool.
Absolutely.
So that's just a little insight into what's going on summer-wise.
Yeah.
For anyone out there who cares. So what do we got going on for our show today?
We have Mr. Dan Winter. This is going to be an interesting. Dan
Winter is perfect during the summer months.
During the summer months.
We need a little winter, right? We got to balance it out.
So Dan is an electrical engineer, physics of consciousness biofeedback inventor, and I can't wait to hear about that. You know, I'll just start channeling like no tomorrow. And in our pre-show, we were talking about shungite, and I'm really excited to talk about that as well. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I enjoyed your conversation. You know, I'm in South France, and it was hot here, and we fired up the air conditioner. We have a canal of mountain cold water right next, and we're pretty lucky. So,
oh yeah, you are. Oh, that sounds.
I remember, Dan. I haven't spent a lot of time in France, but I lived in Germany for a few years, and there were like ACs were not really a thing. I mean, maybe in like the corporate buildings, but in my apartment, I mean.
That's right.
We had a fan, basically. Is that kind of correct?
That's true. A lot of the older structures, they don't. And it's true that the weather was milder. Although now, with the European heat wave, I'm sure people are reconsidering that. But we're in the mountains in the Pyrenees, and we're lucky. The sea is that way, and the skiing is the other way. We're good.
Dan,
Sounds
what
like
brought
a
you to
great
the
location.
South? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, paper, rock, scissors.
What brought you over to France?
Well, actually, I'm based in Australia, and we did round the world lecture tours for many years, dozen years every year. And I go back and forth. My magic lady is in South France, honestly. And also we have a wonderful network and connections here. But our technologies, many of them are based in Australia, like our Therify Plasma Tech and the Imploder, things like that.
So let's take a little walk about down memory lane with you, Dan, because you have had this really amazing career. I mean, you have these decades of expertise, in engineering. I believe you got your beginnings of your education at the University of Detroit, and you've worked at IBM, and you're the founder of Network of Light, and you've just had real input into just some incredible things over your career. So take us back to what it was like to be Dan, maybe even before college, as you start thinking about what you want to be doing in your life. What were some of those original curiosities that you had that, as you look back now, you go, well, I started this journey at 15. I really started, being curious about certain things.
Well, that's actually true. It's a good way to start. My grandfather has an electric motor business, SS Electric, Buffalo, New York. And I was Sparky the motor whiz there when I was a kid. And I became I was doing motor repair and electric diagnostic when I was a teenager a lot. And then, so when I went from St. Francis High School to University of Detroit, I chose electrical engineering, as did my uncle. And then as I approached graduate level, Albert Axe was my mentor, very famous, one of the inventors of biofeedback. And so I was interested in the psychology of electrical engineering. Like, how come on the polygraph, if the college student looks at Playboy magazine, the GSR, the skin resistance, goes off the chart faster than a transistor? What's that switch? How did it work? And so I built polygraphs in graduate school, actually. And that started me on my career. And then I was hired as an IBM systems analyst and, was a programmer and did all that stuff in Detroit, Chicago, and Poughkeepsie. And yeah, I've been around. And I founded a community and I work, I helped found Gaia TV. It's quite a story.
Wow.
I love how you're just like casually, and then I did this, and then I just did this and this. Like, that's just amazing.
So I was lucky. My family empowered me. So I went around the world to the pyramids. I was in Findor in the pyramids and the Andes, doing my mystical spiritual quest in between all of that, actually. So I was lucky.
What were the pyramids like?
The lights went out when I laid down in the king's chamber, actually. And I know why it's plasma projective, actually. And I've made films now on the electrical functions of pyramids, how it made a global wireless grid. It's because the Schumann cascade is a phase conjugate pump wave, and that's how you get the longitudinal out of the pyramid, and that's how they work. I did a film on it recently with Sam from Bosnia.
Dan, did you ever see the movie Good Will Hunting?
Oh, yes, Robin Williams, of course.
Yeah,
yes.
Robin Williams. When you were sharing the beginning of your story there's this great line. The movie is about this young man, Will Hunting, who's this genius, and he, signs up to be this janitor at MIT. And one of the questions he gets asked throughout the movie, he's doing someone's homework, this girl he's dating from Harvard, and it's really complicated stuff. And she's like, it takes me 4 hours to do this and you do it in 2 minutes. And he has this line where he says, well, you know how Mozart could just sit in front of a piano and just play? It just kind of made sense to him. That's what this is like to me. You put a piano in front of me, I wouldn't know what to do with it. But when it comes to math, I can just play. And I got this little intuition around you and electricity and cars. Would you say that was because you put me in front of a car, I go, find me the nearest person to pay to do this? Because I'm going to this car will be non-functioning if you put some tools in my hand. Would you say you had kind of a knack for things like that?
Well, actually, remembering my past lives in Europe with John D. Alchemy somewhere in there. And then when I was in 10th grade, they decided I was going to be the teacher for the geometry class. I was so I had an extremely that my phenomenology of perception professor said extremely analytical mind. But it's interesting. I could do visual geometry. Absolutely, I was kind of a genius. But when you got to calculus and you lost the visual symbol, not so much. So my analytical was visual based. But yeah, and then later when I understood what John Dee was doing, how he was communicating with ancestors with scintillation and light, it is geometry.
Okay, let's talk about sacred geometry because it's just all around you. And it's just like, oh my goodness.
Well, sacred geometry is an introduction to wave mechanics. That's all it is, because wave mechanics is only about geometry. What makes it interesting is if the geometry is right, the wave mechanics will implode. And it's called charge collapse. And that's the cause of gravity and consciousness. And that was not known on this planet before me. And that's the title of my new book, PlanckFire.com. All of physics agrees charge collapse causes consciousness, causes gravity, but doesn't have a clue what causes charge collapse. Therefore, no physicist has a clue what causes gravity or consciousness. The answer is charge collapse. And how charge collapse is very specific. You make this geometry, it's called pentadodeca, and you create golden ratio, and there's implosion of charge tuned to the Planck threshold at center. And I wrote the equation to prove that is the radii of hydrogen, and the reason hydrogen makes gravity, because it's fractal.
I need an interpreter.
This is where I feel
I'm so fascinated. So
the x, y, and z coordinate of every pentadodeca in this infinite nest of dodecacosadodeca, the x, y, z coordinate is a simple multiple of golden mean ratio, 1.618. That's the reason gravity exists, and that's the reason when you make golden ratio in your brain waves, you have bliss, charge collapse.
Is that, I may be jumping way out of the stream here, but is that what us lay people call being in a flow state?
Actually, in the flow, technically in the sports literature, and we measure that. It's called flameinmind.com. It's one of my inventions. It's a brainwave tech, biofeedback tech. And of course, what we measure is when you have golden ratio in the brainwaves from alpha to gamma, you have the implosion called bliss. And also now we know that's how Jean-Charles Moyen does teleportation, actually. But that's the advanced work. But that's also how you teach kids to see without their eyes. What happens is those golden ratio and brainwaves cause the inner plasma vortex inside your head to squeeze. All the kids seeing without their eyes, when they get to that bliss state, golden ratio, they say, oh, a vortex appeared in my head. The center of that tornado is an eyeball. They're blindfolded, and they can see without their eyes very well. They're seeing a plasma vortex, and that's the only physics of consciousness there is. The point is the golden ratio enables you to squeeze that vortex to a point, and that's what creates perception, actually. And if the golden ratio amplitude in your brainwaves is high enough, you actually do teleport, and there are witnesses. And that's what I'm speaking about next week at the conference with Elena Denham.
Wow. You've been writing and speaking on these topics for many, many decades. And I know one of the original places you started expressing these things were the newspaper called Network of Light. What were some of those kind of original...
45 years ago, I think, but yeah.
Yeah. What were some of those? Do you have memory of some of those original pieces that you put out?
Oh, yeah. In fact, on my Facebook, we have some of the original Network. Well, there was a team out there, Dennis, and we, those were the first days on an Apple computer you could actually lay out graphics. That was the first time in history you could lay out your own graphics. And we started a consciousness newspaper in Western New York from my Crystal Hill farm. Absolutely. Yeah, that was... I had a farm there and, 7 bedrooms and 3 wells and a pond and greenhouse and a flow form and a labyrinth. Those were the days.
So one of the things, Dan, that there's a lot of people that I think many of the things that we're talking about are really high level intellect. And there is a word that you've now used a few times that you're really, really tied into, which is biofeedback. And I think that there's a lot that we could talk about in terms of what we love to do with the show is really give people tangible information that they can walk away from and implant and take action on in their lives. So in segment 2, do you think you could kind of walk us through what biofeedback is in a really tangible way so that our listeners can kind of pick up on it and get it? Do you think that's something we could do?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
All right. Awesome.
It's surprisingly simple. If you learn how to make alpha around 8 hertz in your brainwave, you're coupling with the Schumann harmonic. And then when the alpha forms a cascade in the brainwaves, you have that first rush of bliss, actually. And that's what flameinmind.com is designed for. And you literally make a flame in your mind.
That's awesome. So we will learn how to do that. We'll be right back. Right,
What?
Kelly?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. We're back. This is going to be good. And I'm going to let you guys know, Dan's really smart. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I love all of your, I don't want to say toys you have, but your beautiful models are just gorgeous. I see, to you come across that they're toys. Like, that's how your vibration and how you're popping up and how they're fun for you. And this is joyful. And so I'm not saying toy in a negative way. It's your playing, and you just grab them and they just light up. There's another one. This is fantastic.
Charge collapse, implosion, centering force. It's called the vector flexor. I learned that personally from Bucky.
Okay, you guys, this is going to be a wild ride. Okay, here we go. Brian, tee us up.
So we were talking about biofeedback, Dan, and maybe you can walk us through what that is, just maybe as a definition, and then talk through how you've incorporated it and taught it, and give us the whole thing here.
It's a great place to start. Well, remember in graduate school, I was adopted by Albert Axe and later Elmer Green, one of the founders of biofeedback. And at that time, I was building the polygraph, and we were using biofeedback for headaches and hypertension. So in those cases, you're giving people feedback cues really to teach them to relax is very simple. But since I've been inventing biofeedback tools for 30 years now, and the key, most powerful, is probably flameinmind.com, where we display brainwave harmonics. Can I do a quick slide here? Is that
sure?
Visual? Yeah.
Hold on.
Let me see. Well, just to show at flameinmind.com, what we're doing, we're showing you when you're able to make alpha, which is about 8 hertz, and then when that, let's see, share screen, when that becomes a window. One moment. Here we go. Towards top. Okay, so this
is the first, you guys.
This.
Go for it, Dan.
So you see, there's 5 harmonics in golden mean ratio in my brainwaves right here. This is a display from flameinmind.com or related. And the green is the alpha here. And the ratio, and that's the beta. And the ratio between those frequencies is golden mean ratio, exactly like on the right. On the bottom are the green harmonics of the Schumann cascade. It's called a phase conjugate pump wave. It's a Schumann harmonics. And that obeys an equation called negentropy, which is Planck times golden ratio. And here's the equation. So perfect implosion and the Schumann harmonics and brainwave harmonics are the same. It's a caduceus-shaped implosion device. And here let's start with the kids. So here the kids, when they see without their eyes, they make a cascade in their brainwave harmonics, and they can do Rubik's Cube and all this stuff with their eyes closed, but they have to go into this bliss or trance state first. So the question on the table, and now I'm going to turn off this stop sharing. Okay. So in order to go into that bliss state for kids who want to see without their eyes, it's a very famous thing. They discovered it in Russia, but it's all over the world now. The way they enter that trance or bliss state is very interesting. Originally, imagine yourself in gorgeous nature. Your body will flip an electric switch and you implode. If you're imagining, you don't actually have to be in nature, just imagine you're in beautiful nature. And your body flips a switch and you implode, and you get that implosive brainwave cascade. And then all the kids say, I saw a vortex appear inside my head. I'm blindfolded and I can see through the tornado. The tornado is the eyeball. That's the physics of consciousness. So how do you teach people to get there? That's one of the best examples of biofeedback, And there's a series of audio cues. Originally it was called binaural beats for bliss.
Yeah.
You feed that same audio cascade into the headphones, differentially one ear to the other ear, and that infrasound beats, but the interference between the two headphones, which are out of phase, beats inside your head, and you feel the beat moving around inside your head. It's called perfect binaural beat audio cues for implosion. That's an example. That's all about at flameinmind.com, and we call it Flame in Sound. And so that's a biofeedback, and you help people get to that trance or bliss state. And the reason it's bliss is because it's implosive and centripetal, technically negentropic.
Dan, have you seen the ability of the binaural beat with, let's say, a picture of nature? Is that a helpful cue? Or?
Yes, that would be, yes.
Okay.
Now, other helpful cues would be to be at a place where there is compression. For example, sunrise and sunset are better. You can do action at a distance and healing and Agnihotra. They exist at sunrise and sunset also because you have that perpendicular compression wave. Also, if you're at a magnetic line cross. Also, if you're in a building that's not heavy metal and electrosmog, where sacred space is possible. So anything that enables compression, enables the sacred space, for example, is Earth grid sacred sites, where telepathy is measurably enabled for that reason.
Tell us more about some of these sacred spaces in the world.
Well, remember, I approach this as an electrical engineer.
Okay.
And the technical term for that is called longitudinal interferometry. It is the nodes where the magnetic lines of Earth cross. And they happen to cross in exactly this geometry, dodeca ecosa, where it has been measured that only there is telepathy enabled, only there is nuclear critical mass measurably reduced, Ruth Cathy, because those are the compression nodes. And the reason the compression nodes work is they couple to the longitudinal array at the center, sometimes called dreaming track, songline, collective unconscious, or communion of saints. Electrical engineers now know exactly what that is. It's an array of longitudinal wave nodes. For example, successful death is enabled there.
So for someone who's listening in, would you say that you could qualify that if someone went on YouTube, binaural beats, and they were, say, looking out into nature or watching a sunset, that they would absolutely move into the experience of what you're saying?
Bliss binaural beats are very famous. Is with not Ray Charles, Brother Charles, very famous. And then Monroe Institute for years used that for remote viewing because you get that plasma projected. That's the physics of remote viewing. And those same frequencies now, science has proved trigger lucid dreaming, as we do regularly, again with that same harmonics at therify.net, our plasma tech in 25 countries. We triggered lucid dreaming for the same reason, because that compression enables the DNA to recursively braid, implode, and spit out that longitudinal wave, which is the coherence. It used to be called the Ba from the car, the Kesjan body, or rainbow light body, but it's actually the physics of entering a coherent longitudinal array. So not only is it proven measurably to trigger lucid dreaming, but that now we know why that accurately predicts who will take memory through death. It is literally the physics of soul.
So the physics of soul, this is something that you've brought into the world. Describe more what you mean by that. I mean, I think people have an understanding, okay, a heart, there's a physical nature to that.
Yeah,
and then there's
heart is implosive, yes.
And then there's the spiritual. I think people would more go, there's the spiritual part, the heart, the soul, but you're now bringing it into this physics realm. And so describe
Absolutely.
that.
It must be described scientifically, or our governments and schools will never teach it.
Right.
And then they will be soulless. No, but my YouTube channel has 3 million views, 350 films, Dan Winter Fractal Field. They can find a dozen or 20 films on there about the physics of soul. But in short, it's simple that when your body responds well to implosive compression, bliss, for example, sacred sites, we've measured the coherent EKG and EEG of bliss recursively implode braid DNA, and that phonon emission, as the squeezing is completed, the DNA squeezes because the hydrogen bond is at the center of every ladder rung. And then the DNA then spits out, the transverse wave was up and down, not coherent enough. But after compression down the vortex, at the throat of the squirt gun at the Planck threshold, and that's what my equation proved, planckfire.com, it spits out the coherent longitudinal, incorrectly called scalar. And embedding in that coherence is required for successful death, lucid dreaming, and having a soul. It's very physical, absolutely.
So I don't even know where to go. I have to tell you, Dan, you're amazing. AI and artificial intelligence right now is really, I want to say it's almost like a wave that's really coming in. And you mentioned souls. Can AI have souls or be infused with souls?
Yeah, and again, we have about 20 films about that on our channel, too.
Oh, sure, of course you do.
A very, very useful question. And the answer is very simple, actually. What we're calling soul is a plasma implosion that gets centripetal by recursively turning inside out and then becomes plasma projective in the longitudinal array. And none of that will ever happen in a metal machine, ever. Let's be clear. So it's not that AI is bad or that artificial intelligence, no. But until we know what a soul is, we're going to be confused about what's useful. So soulless behavior will continue until scientists know what a soul is. This is trouble.
Tell me more about that.
Well, basically, our governments and our universities, because they don't know what a soul is, let me give you an example. We measured, it appears that the vaccine measurably dissociates the plasma field from the body. It's called being beside yourself. And if you measure that dislocation of the plasma field from the physical body, and that's measurable, the geobiologists do it all the time, you know, when you're beside yourself, well, it is obviously induced in part by the vaccine. And so since governments did not know what a soul is, they said, okay, let's do this vaccine. But oops, if they had known what a soul is and knew how to measure it electrically, hello. So actually the coherence of that plasma field, your aura, the ba from the ka, is the only thing that's going to take you through death. But since your government doesn't know what that is, of course they're soulless. Oops, let's teach them.
Okay. I have a feeling that you have some passion around this one.
Well, when people's pets didn't recognize them after the vaccine, you could suspect there's something wrong.
Brian?
So you mentioned that you've done all these videos and you have all this content, and would you say that what would you say you're most passionate about? Is it creating environments for people to learn? Do you like speaking, writing, creating movies? What do you feel like, you know, whenever your time physically here is, you know, over, what is your legacy?
Well, in my book, planckfire.com, where I proved by equation the cause of gravity and consciousness, I think it's rather hilarious that there's not a scientist on this planet who knows why objects fall to the ground. I think they should be embarrassed. So I'm curious why they're not embarrassed. Because unless you know why an object falls to the ground, you could not possibly know the cause of consciousness, which is charge collapse. So I'm curious why they're not embarrassed. I think it was actually, there's a famous book, and they said, why, they're a pretty arrogant group, those physicists, for not having a clue why objects fall to the ground. That's a detail.
That's a big detail. Like, right?
Hello, why aren't they embarrassed? That's my curiosity.
Well, how do you know that they're not embarrassed?
It's like the emperor has no clothes
That's
on.
what I would.
Nobody
Yep.
dares ask the question. That's the problem.
That's
the reason
true.
objects fall to the ground is because in the center of hydrogen, there's a structure based on golden ratio called fractality. Most of the physicists already know that fractality causes gravity, but they've never even thought about what a fractal electric field is. Hint, the equation I wrote proving this is how hydrogen is built.
So tell us about this new book that you wrote. What is the premise?
Planckfire, Plankphire, planckfire.com. It's called Planckfire because you take Planck, the musical key signature of every wave physics has ever measured, and you multiply it repeatedly by golden ratio. You get this geometry, and you get 100 like 3 radii of hydrogen, the Schumann harmonics, the Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional, and every single negentropic biologic frequency, everything that's self-organizing in the universe is that equation, including the definition of all sacred dimensions, the British foot, for example, all Planck times golden ratio, which is how you make 0-point energy and how you go through death. It's called charge collapse. So my curiosity is why physics is not embarrassed for not knowing the cause of charge collapse. I'm curious.
There was this phrase that you said a couple times. I think it was like successful death. Did
Absolutely.
I get that
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
So
tell us
just
about
quickly,
successful death. Yeah.
What is successful death?
Well, the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, I could bring up the slide, but goldenmean.info/immortality is the website. And so Heinrich Clouvet proved that everybody at death sees the same thing. It's a map to dying. It's well known. It's physics. And what they see is lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And that's actually the geometry of DNA imploding. Now, when the famous Ray Moody proved that death visions are electrically contagious, we learned something, that successful death is literally a black hole. It's a compression event. And what that does, that compression takes your plasma, your aura, your memory, and that's why you see your whole life in a second just before you die. It's a compression event, obviously, electrically speaking. And the geometry of your DNA imploding is what you see, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And that's all graphics are there. So that you can embed into that coherent longitudinal array called dreaming track, song line, collective unconscious, communion of saints. You got too many names for it, but not enough physics. Well, you don't get in there unless you can do compression well. For example, if you're angry at death, it ain't going to work. It's not compressible. Hello.
Well, we will be
bam.
right back.
How do you, that's just bam. I love it. Okay, you guys, we are here with the amazing, I don't even know how to describe you in words, man. I'm just woo, Dan Winter. On behalf of Brian, this is Kelly. This is the Being Curious Show, and we will be right back.
And welcome back, everyone. We are here with Dan Winter. And there's a question, Dan, that I've been really excited to get to in our time with you. And of course, we're only going to get to a couple of the million things that we could talk about. But there's this fascination, I think probably throughout human history, but certainly it's been exposed a lot in the past, let's say 70 odd years, around aliens and extraterrestrial and those types of things. And I know that you've got some experience in this kind of conversation. In fact, you actually have some, maybe it's intel or ideas around the good guys versus bad guys when it comes to this conversation of the extraterrestrial. So I think that's a topic that is very intriguing to a lot of people. And what is your sense of that? And
build us up. How did you tell us about? Because I can see you as a young boy, and tell us where you're going, because you have some knowledge that not the average bear has.
Well, I was kind of adopted by various shaman when I was younger.
Of course, you were.
I lived with the Seneca and the Iroquois, Dahani Wahoo of the Cherokee, and Twyla Neach of the Seneca. And then I was adopted by some of the Hopi, and then Robert Morning Sky and Ghost Wolf. And then I knew Alex Collier famously with the Andromedans. And I have been teaching extraterrestrial history and extraterrestrial physics for 20 years, actually. And I've done hundreds, actually, of recordings about this. And in addition to 3 million views on my YouTube channel, I have co-recorded with the famous Elena Denan, who I have partnered with, and there's probably 250,000 views on my videos with her about ET history, and I recommend her book, The Cedar Races. So yes, we have a huge amount of information about that. And that is all at fractalfield.com/fusionintheblood. And yes, we have specifically the Nebu Gray Drac Alliance was ejected from the solar system about 1.5 years ago, thanks to the Galactic Federation, and they had infested, especially the South Pole, and they were doing, after, it was MJ-12 that tricked. To be clear, we don't want to blame Eisenhower here. I got to be clear. MJ-12 tricked Eisenhower into the Greada Treaty with the wrong grade, Nebu, And after that, millions of Americans were abducted. It's clear. It's historically evident by the Greys and Dracos, actually. But the really cool thing is, 10 years ago, I predicted that Earth would be the vaccine for the Orion Wars. And guess what? I was. The same three tall Greys who tricked MJ-12 and Eisenhower, the Federation trapped here on Earth and froze them quick enough that they could create literally a virus which infected the Nebu hive queen of the Greys, which controlled the biggest stargate in the galaxy, the Trapezium in Orion. And the Orion Wars are over. And Earth was the vaccine. It's very cool. And this is not a fairy tale. Read Elena Danaan. It's all true. Hankey's back. The Cedars are back. It's a fun story. And I teach this every day.
So when you say the Greys, is there anything that has been popular enough in terms of a physical representation of what an alien would look like? Is there anything that people can relate to that you would say is a good representation of the Greys or aliens? Or
the Aboriginal idea of God, what do they call them? The Wandjina, yeah, there. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie.
The Greys in Australia are depicted as the Wandjina. You know, the Aboriginal marriage law is from Alpha Draco directly, as is the caste system in India. That's why the male tribe and the female tribes were at war for thousands of years in Australia. The primary reason, it is a desert. And when we did ritual to heal that, rainstorms followed us across countries, thanks to Malcolm, actually. So there are many examples of Draco history infecting. But yes, the Greys are not called, the Templars called them the Khmer, actually. And the group that was studied from Earth, Oliver Wendell Stevens wrote that book, Contact from Reticulum. There's only one branch of many of the Greys. They're not all insidious or parasitic. Very complicated story. But for the most part, the parasites on Earth were the Greys and the Drac, who are called Siakar, that's a royal Draco. And Elena calls them the Nebu.
So you kind of touched that it'd be difficult and it's complex, but what is describing the different alien species as bad guys and good guys? Does it come down to no soul versus soul? I mean, how do you describe that? There's wonderful branches of the reptilian species who are very psychokinetic, and they know how to go back into a body after death. So that's a very complicated question. But basically what differentiates those who joined the Federation, for example, they all agree on the prime directive, for example. Like, you wouldn't want to mess with indigenous tribes. Well, they don't mess with indigenous tribes either. They let them grow up. Now, that's fundamental. That's an indicator. And the Galactic Federation is now powerful enough that the Greys and the Dracos won't be back soon, but again, we need defense for that. It's another complicated story.
And so you mentioned President Eisenhower at some point. Is that kind of an insight into what you would say is the fact that all presidents of the U.S. and certainly the president right now is communicating with?
Presidents were largely excluded from this information, starting with MJ-12 under Eisenhower, who tricked him into the wrong treaty. And that's why Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex. Actually, he was warning us about MJ-12. At one point, he threatened to invade Area 51 if they wouldn't let him in. That was the president of the country didn't have access to one of his own military bases. This is actually, what's his name in Carolinas? Doing the Disclosure Project. Well, that's one of their beefs, is that the government did not have control of the secret government.
Yeah, that could, so the left hand's not speaking to the right hand.
The presidents were not read in to much of this, and this is starting to come out. And that's good news, and that's called the Disclosure Project.
Do you think that was, to quote, protect them, or is it more of like an ignorance is bliss, or is
their excuse, of course, was called national security. Oh, if we tell the people that ETs are here, they'll panic. And therefore, the USA became a parasite of the Draco and Greys for decades because, if we tell the people, they'll panic. Oh,
okay.
This was disempowering. So basically now the disclosure movement is way behind. But anybody that has studied any of the secret space program survivors, and we have interviewed dozens of them, and they all correlate perfectly with Elena Danaan and the Andromeda team. These stories all fit together perfectly. So the SSP experiencers obviously are right, and the government has some dramatic catching up to do, and they better damn well do it fast, I say.
So what would you say, Dan, what's your prognosis of where we are and where we're going?
The Federation has created space where the human species could make use of new freedom, because they've been so horribly parasited for many decades, probably hundreds of years, really. So now there's a bit of freedom. But remember, there's many hybrid parasites. Even though the Greys and the Dracos have been kicked out, hybrid parasites are still here. There's Grey parasites and Drac parasites. Because remember, Enlil Yahweh, who his mother was Draco. That's why he invited the Draco in here. The Siakar, and they're powerful, man. So the Earth it's like we got the tick out of your arm, but and until we learn to be empowered, basically it's simple. The reason Enki designed, he called it Adam Kadmon, was that humans could have bliss. You could have enough soul, you could steer through the stars and bend tornadoes and do the fun stuff. But until you can teach your kids how to have bliss, you don't even have a chance.
Makes sense.
So how do we do that? What's your hot take on making the world a better place?
I was in a church in Italy once, and I said, the definition of culture is not the color of your shoe polish in your wine. No, the definition of culture is if you know how to teach your kids how to have bliss, then you have culture. Otherwise, not. And it's true, because that's what makes them immortal. Hello. So, in bliss process, there were rituals they did. There were songs, there were dances, there's geometry. These are bliss rites. And the rites of initiation are basically bliss rites. And that's the ability to implode. And eventually, you steer song lines. When Andy Lorraine died in Mullumbimby, the storm went across the continent because that magnetic line was a family pet.
So is there something that people could take home today that they could practice every day, whether they're teaching their children or for themselves, to find bliss, to get to bliss?
Absolutely. My second book, Implosion, Secret Science of Immortality, which is at goldenmean.info/conscious kids, was the bliss hygiene suggestions. But very practically, it means, have you located the sacred space in your living room? Like, do you know where the magnetic lines cross? Do you have an altar? Do you have a place where you know how to accrete, charge, implode? And then you do that. It's called a Mayer wave breath, 0.1 hertz, 10-second breath, which is the best way to start any bliss process or therapy or plasma healing or remote viewing, anything. You do the 0.1, 10-second breath, 5 seconds. So you do the 10-second breath. And then you...
Well, let's pause, because this is great. So do this for us. Would you say 10-second breath? Is it 5 in, 5 out, or? That's
right. Yeah. It's because 0.1 hertz is the most important frequency in the body. Basic. It's called the Mayer wave. It's the definition of LF component of HRV, heart rate variability, and the building block of the spine liquid pump, the only definition of Kundalini and bliss. So 0.1 hertz breathing is a great start. And then obviously if you can do some alpha training and, meditation practice, and doing it at sunrise, sunset is great. If you can do it at the seaside, great, because you got longitudinal coherence, all those things that allow you to implode charge. And if you have a bliss group that learns to lucid dream together and go through the heart of the sun together, then you're getting there. It's called luciddreamteam.com.
So Dan, I'd love for you to tell me the physics around, you mentioned like being by the ocean or the water. And I think, what is it about the ocean, certainly, but even certain waters or even water in general, there's that. Yes. I mean, when you get baptized, you get dunked in the water. There's this whole thing about water. Absolutely. What is that all about?
Well, it's the maximum. The ether is a superfluid made of charge, and the best emulator for that is water itself, because the hydrogen bond is so fractal, which makes it implosive. So when water gets to recursively braid, it becomes self-aware, which enables longitudinal interferometry. So basically, by the seacoast, for example, when Jean-Charles Moyen did his first teleportation, he always did it at the seacoast, the beach, because you have access to better longitudinal interferometry. The first 4 times we saw the green flash in Australia, at the sea, the flatness.
And so the same way you've gone as deep into the body and the soul as you can, you've gone into outer space, sticking with the ocean. do you have any take on the vastness of the ocean that is still relatively undiscovered to most people? Do you have any insights into that?
Well, if you study the Dodeca-Ecosa Earth Grid map, Anti-Gravity in the World Grid by Becker and Huygens is one example, where the nuclear critical mass was affected at the sacred sites, that you find the cross points on the ocean also, where that leverage is enabled for the lucid dreaming. For example, the star navigating that the ancients did is what enabled them to navigate the Pacific. It was literally lucid dreaming. The ceiling at Dendera is a galaxy map, literally, because their lucid dream was that big. And it started with a leverage from the ocean for sure. So the ocean is a metaphor for the ocean of the stars, for sure.
And so, Dan, you have your YouTube channel, and I encourage everyone to go there. Just go to YouTube, Dan Winter. Your channel's right there.
Dan Winter Fractal Field is the YouTube.
Dan Winter Fractal Field.
The main website's fractalfield.com. The technology's therify.net, rejuvenation plasma and negentropy, working in 25 countries. Therify, T-H-E-R-A-P-H-I, therify.net. The brainwave is flameinmind.com for bliss, and the water implosion, theimploder.com. Our university is fractalu.com, and my Facebook is Fractal Field.
Amazing. So we're wrapping up segment 3, and we're wrapping up our show with you, Dan. Do you have any final thoughts or an invitation or something that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, yes, just don't think that physics collapses the romance and beauty of spirituality. Think of the opposite, that physics enables the romance and beauty of spirituality. If you understood the fractality of hydrogen and the fractality of the Earth grid and how that implosion makes gravity and consciousness, suddenly you can study physics and have the most beautiful spiritual inspiration. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you, Dan. This has been a beautifully interesting conversation, and we're very grateful you've been on our show. Kelly, do you want to send us home?
Okay. So I've got to ask you really quickly, because since we have a minute left, why am I just drawn to shungite?
Well, shungite is what's called super dielectric. It's like why the Kaaba stone was the philosopher's stone, because it's charge distribution permissive. Super dielectrics like insect skeletons that literally make anti-gravity Grebennikos work. So it will, when you put that in front of a piezo oscillator that's healing, it'll resonate that implosive piezo, our piezofire.com, and fill the room, because the shungite is basically permits implosion because it's permissive to charge distribution. It's why the ancient tribes would walk 600 miles to get the right stone to make a statue of their ancestor, because their ancestor could inhabit because it was a super dielectric.
That is fantastic. Cue the sirens, cue the shungite. Dan, you are fascinating, man. I've just thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. This is the Being Curious show. That's Brian. I'm Kelly. We have Dan.
And I'm still curious.
And you're still curious. Dan, oh my goodness, man. What an honor. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
It was fun.
Great.